All right, let's dive right in. Victorian poetry, it can feel like this huge, dense, and complicated world to navigate, right? It's full of all this conflict and change. So in this explainer, what we're going to do is build a really solid, exam-focused foundation on 3 of its absolute titans: Tennyson, Browning, and Arnold. The goal here is to give you the tools you need to confidently tackle any poem or question that gets thrown your way. So here's our game plan for today. We'll start by really getting a feel for the Victorian world itself, to understand all the unique pressures and anxieties of the time. From there, we'll break down the major works of our 3 poets piece by piece, and we'll wrap it all up by looking at some specific exam questions to make sure you're totally ready. Let's get started. So why is this era such a big deal for your exams? I mean, really, what's so special about it? Well, it was a time of absolutely massive change. We're talking industrial, social, and intellectual upheaval. Just imagine a world where huge scientific breakthroughs are suddenly clashing with centuries of religious faith. This tension, this conflict, is basically the engine that drives all the poetry, which makes it an incredibly rich and fascinating area to analyze. And with that in mind, our focus today is really simple. We're building a strong conceptual framework for these 3 poets. We're going to zero in on the literary devices, the themes, and the big ideas that examiners love to ask about, so you can walk into your test feeling completely prepared. First up, we have Alfred Lord Tennyson, the poet laureate himself. What's so fascinating about his work is that it's a study in contrasts. On the one hand, you get this grand, heroic ambition, the striving for greatness. And on the other, there's this really deep, personal, and profound melancholy. We're going to explore both sides of that coin. Let's start with a classic exam question about his poem Ulysses. Why is it called a dramatic monologue? Now, to even begin to answer that, we first need to get a really solid grip on what that term actually means. Okay, so here's the definition you need to lock in. A dramatic monologue isn't just someone giving a speech. It has 3 key ingredients. You've got a single speaker, who is definitely not the poet, a silent but very specific listener, and a crucial dramatic situation. But the real magic is in what the speaker unintentionally reveals about their own character. Now let's apply this directly to Ulysses. Let's check the boxes. The speaker, clearly Ulysses, an old king who's bored out of his mind with quiet life at home. The situation, it's incredibly dramatic. He's basically planning to ditch his kingdom for one last epic adventure. And who's he talking to? He's trying to rally his old sailors to join him. Through this speech, we don't just see his heroic spirit, we also see his restlessness, and you could even argue his flaws as a king. It fits the definition to a T. This line right here is the heart of the poem's power. It just perfectly captures that universal human drive to keep learning, to grow from every experience, and to push past what we already know. Ulysses really embodies this timeless spirit of exploration that still resonates today. So for your exams, this is crucial. You need to be able to pull out these themes. Yeah, the poem is about adventure, but it's also a really complex look at leadership and duty. Is Ulysses a hero for wanting to keep exploring, or is he kind of abandoning his responsibilities to his son and his kingdom? That tension between personal desire and public duty is a classic Victorian obsession. And then we get to that powerhouse of a conclusion. This final line has become an anthem for never giving up. It's this powerful declaration of unwavering determination, even in the face of old age and death. It's such an optimistic and inspiring way to end his speech. And here's a little extra something for a top-grade answer. It's worth remembering that many critics see a piece of Tennyson himself in Ulysses. As a young poet who was really fighting for recognition, Tennyson channeled his own creative drive and his frustrations into this legendary character, which gives the poem a really deep personal layer. Okay, let's switch gears and explore that other side of Tennyson with his poem, Break, Break, Break. A really common question is whether you can call this a work of melancholy. And the short answer is a huge resounding yes. But let's break down exactly why. The evidence is just all over the poem. That relentless repetition of break, break, break feels just like the endless waves and the speaker's own inescapable grief. The imagery is also key. You have happy kids and a singing sailor, and all of that joy just makes the speaker's internal pain feel even sharper. And through it all, the sea just doesn't care. It all builds this incredibly somber mood that's centered on a loss that can never, ever be recovered. This couplet is the absolute core of the poem's heartbreak. It's a statement of total, final, irretrievable loss. And for Tennyson, this was incredibly personal. The poem is widely understood to be an elegy for his best friend Arthur Hallam, whose sudden death just completely shattered him. This line captures that profound sense of finality perfectly. Okay, so from Tennyson, we pivot to Robert Browning, who is, without a doubt, the undisputed master of the dramatic monologue. If Tennyson used the form to explore heroic ambition, Browning used it like a surgeon's scalpel to dissect the human mind, often shining a light into its darkest, most twisted corners. This is poetry as psychological portraiture. Let's start with his most famous work, My Last Duchess. Okay, picture the scene. We are in the grand palace of an Italian Renaissance duke. He's talking to a representative who's there to negotiate the duke's next marriage. And as he shows this guy a portrait of his last duchess, he starts to talk. These opening lines are just chilling. Notice the immediate possessiveness, my last duchess. He doesn't even bother to use her name. She's an object, a thing he owns. And then he says the painting looks as if she were alive, which hints that he actually prefers this controlled, lifeless image of her to the real, vibrant woman she used to be. Through his own words, the Duke paints this absolutely damning self-portrait. He's possessive, making it clear that he's the only one who decides who gets to see the painting. He's incredibly arrogant, obsessed with his ancient family name. And what was her supposed crime? She was too nice, too easily pleased. She smiled at everyone, and he saw that as a personal insult to his own supreme importance. It all reveals this terrifying need for absolute control. And here it is, the poem's horrifying climax. This is such a masterful, cold-blooded euphemism. He doesn't say, I had her murdered. He just says, he gave commands. That cold, clinical phrasing reveals the full extent of his ruthless, tyrannical soul. In that one line, he confesses everything while confessing nothing at all. And if you thought the Duke was disturbing, Browning takes us even deeper into psychological horror with Porphyria's lover. This time, the speaker isn't a powerful Duke, but trust me, his mind is every bit as dangerous. The speaker's logic here is just chillingly calm and methodical. He sees this moment where Porphyria is showing him total devotion, as perfect, as sublime. And in his completely warped mind, the only way to make that perfect moment last forever is to literally stop time. And so he murders her, believing he's not destroying her, but actually immortalizing their love and granting her deepest wish. It's a terrifying look at a mind spiraling into madness. And this is where the poem's true horror really hits you. It's this massive, terrifying gap between the speaker's perception and the gruesome reality of what he's done. He sees his action as this ultimate act of love and preservation. But the reality? It's an act of supreme selfishness, a violent murder driven by a terrifying desire for total possession and control. Our final poet, Matthew Arnold, confronts what was probably the central intellectual crisis of the entire Victorian age: the slow, painful decline of religious faith. As science, especially Darwin's theories, started to chip away at long-held beliefs, a lot of people felt this profound sense of being lost and uncertain. Arnold became the poet of that doubt. Dover Beach, which is his most famous poem, opens with this absolutely beautiful, calm imagery. The speaker is looking out at the English Channel with someone he loves. The whole scene feels peaceful, serene, and timeless. The language just lulls you into this sense of tranquility. But that calm is not going to last. And just look at the shocking contrast with the poem's ending. We go from a calm, moonlit sea to a dark, chaotic, terrifying battlefield. This is the poem's core message. The world might look beautiful on the surface, but underneath, it has become a place of confusion, conflict, and deep uncertainty because its guiding light, its faith, is flickering out. The central metaphor you have to understand in this poem is the sea of faith. Arnold imagines that religious belief was once like a high tide, covering the entire world, giving everything meaning and certainty. But now, all he can hear is its melancholy, long, withdrawing roar. As this sea of faith pulls back, it leaves humanity exposed and vulnerable on the naked shingles of the world. Arnold's vision of this new, modern world is incredibly bleak. He says it's a world that only seems to be beautiful, but deep down, it has no real joy, or love, or light. Without that anchor of faith, there's no certainty, no peace, no help for pain. Humanity is just left feeling isolated and confused in a world it doesn't understand anymore. So what's the answer? Is there any hope? Well, in this dark and confusing world, Arnold suggests the only real comfort left is an authentic human connection. The poem's final, desperate plea is for personal love and loyalty. The idea is that if the world outside is a chaotic mess, then at least the truth and connection between two people can create one small, safe space of meaning. Okay, let's bring all of this together and focus squarely on what you need for your exams. We've covered a ton of ground, so let's do a quick recap of the essential concepts and see how they might actually show up on your test. Here are the absolute crucial takeaways. For both Tennyson and Browning, you have to understand the dramatic monologue as a tool for revealing character. For Tennyson specifically, remember that conflict between adventure and duty. For Browning, it's all about the dark psychology of power, control, and obsession. And for Arnold, the key concept you have to remember is the crisis of faith. These are exactly the kinds of long-form questions you can expect to see. And the good news is, we have already covered the groundwork for answering every single one of them. You can use the concepts we've talked about, like the definition of a dramatic monologue, the elements of melancholy, the Duke's twisted character, and the sea of faith, to build strong, confident answers. And with that, we've established a really solid foundation. You now have the key concepts, the textual evidence, and the critical frameworks you need to analyze the major male poets of the Victorian era with real clarity and insight. But of course, this is only part of the story. These male poets weren't writing in a vacuum. In part 2 of this series, we're going to turn our attention to the often overlooked but equally powerful and revolutionary works of the Victorian women poets. I'll see you there. All right, welcome back, everyone. Let's jump right back into our deep dive on Victorian literature. So last time, we really set the stage, right? We talked all about the huge social shifts, those scientific bombshells, and the general anxieties that were buzzing around during the Victorian era. Now we're going to pivot from the why to the what. We're getting into the actual masterpieces that defined this incredible age. Okay, so here's what we've got on tap. We're going to tackle the dramatic monologue. Think of it as a psychological stage. Then we'll look at the novel as a kind of social mirror. After that, we'll dive into the poetry of doubt and despair. And finally, we'll pull it all together with some key takeaways to get you ready for any exams. All right, first up, let's talk about a form the Victorians basically perfected, the dramatic monologue. And this thing is incredible. It's like a little one-act play, a psychological stage that gives us this raw, unfiltered peek directly into a character's head. Okay, so here's the key thing to get. We're not just being told a story. It's more like we're eavesdropping, you know? Listening in on one side of a super important conversation. And that means we have to be the detectives, putting together the pieces from what the character says, but also, and this is crucial, from what they don't say. And when you talk about the dramatic monologue, you have to talk about Robert Browning. I mean, he was the absolute master. For Browning, this wasn't just a fancy poetic style. No way. It was more like a surgeon's scalpel, and he used it to dissect these really complex, sometimes fascinating, and often, let's be honest, seriously disturbed minds. A perfect example, his masterpiece, My Last Duchess. So you've got this Duke, right? He's showing off a portrait of his dead wife to some visitor, and as he talks, his monologue just oozes this possessive, controlling nature. Every single word is dripping with ego. It wasn't just that he was jealous of other guys. He was furious that she could be happy about anything that wasn't him, like a sunset or a cherry branch. To him, she was just another pretty thing to own, like the painting itself. And then you get this line. Wow. This is where you see the cold, hard evil at his core. It's so casual. I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. Think about that. He doesn't say, I killed her. He uses this cold, almost corporate phrase. It shows you a guy so powerful, so arrogant, that ending a life is just an administrative task. The implication is just bone-chilling. And if you thought the Duke was dark, Browning goes even deeper in Porphyria's Lover. I mean, this poem is a full-on descent into madness. The speaker's monologue walks us step by step through his completely warped logic. He has this perfect moment with the woman he loves, and his solution to keep it forever? To murder her. It's not about hate. It's about this sick, pathological need to possess that one perfect moment, to literally freeze it in time. Okay, so that's the dark side of the monologue. But now let's switch gears and look at Alfred Lord Tennyson, because he uses the exact same form, but for a totally different effect in his famous poem, Ulysses. And this comparison is just fantastic for understanding the flexibility of the form.
So in this poem, you have Ulysses, the old hero, back home and, well, he's bored out of his mind. He's done with sitting by the fire. And his monologue is this powerful, booming call for more knowledge, more adventure. This isn't some dark secret being whispered. It's a loud, proud declaration of that relentless human drive to keep pushing forward, something the Victorians, with all their ambition, absolutely loved. So let's put these two side by side, because this is where it gets really interesting. You've got Browning, who uses the monologue like a flashlight in a dark basement, exposing all the creepy, psychological stuff hidden away. And then you have Tennyson, who uses it like a spotlight on a stage, celebrating that big, bold, heroic ideal of progress and exploration that the era was so proud of. Same tool, totally different jobs.
And you can bet this is a classic exam question. So if you get asked to compare them, here's what you do. Focus on how they use the form. Talk about the speaker, the silent audience, the slow reveal of information. How does Browning use those things to create suspense and horror, while Tennyson uses them to build up a feeling of inspiration? That's the key.
Okay, let's make a big pivot now. We're moving on to the undisputed heavyweight champion of Victorian literature, the novel. Seriously, this was the form of the era. And for writers back then, it wasn't just about telling a good story. The novel was this huge canvas they could use to paint a picture of their world and to point out everything that was wrong with it.
And where else could we possibly start but with Jane Eyre? I mean, when this book came out, it was a literary bombshell. It just blew up all the old rules about what a novel, and especially what a heroine, was supposed to be. People had never read anything like it. Charlotte Bronte didn't just bend the rules, she completely rewrote the playbook. Think about it. Her main character, Jane, isn't beautiful or rich. She's described as plain, she's poor, but she is fiercely intelligent. And through her eyes, we see a brutal critique of society, the hypocrisy of her boarding school, the awful life of a governess. Bronte makes it clear that for a woman to be truly free, she needs her own money. And that passionate I voice, it forces you, the reader, to live it all right alongside her. And the whole heart of the novel really comes down to her choice between two men, Rochester and St. John. It's often boiled down to passion versus principle, but it's so much deeper than that. Both men, in their own way, want to control her. Rochester wants her to throw away her morals and be his mistress. St. John wants her to erase her own identity and become a tool for his missionary work. The truly radical thing she does is say no to both of them, until she can come back to Rochester not as a dependent, but as a true equal. All right, from Bronte, let's turn to the other giant of the Victorian novel, Charles Dickens. You really can't understand Dickens without knowing that his own tough childhood is all over his writing. And that's never more true than in his most personal book, David Copperfield. One of the most powerful social critiques in the book is how Dickens handles the idea of the fallen woman. I mean, look at the difference. The standard Victorian view was that these women were ruined. End of story. But Dickens? He treats the character of little Emily with so much compassion. He shows us the societal pressures she was under, and he really shines a light on the hypocrisy. He makes you ask the question, why is Emily's life destroyed while the rich guy who seduced her, Steerforth, gets off scot-free? It's a brilliant takedown of the sexual double standard of the time. And Dickens isn't done. He also takes aim at the institution of marriage. The novel is just filled with terrible marriages, as you can see here. Each one is a disaster for a different reason. You've got cruelty, you've got immaturity, it's a mess. And by showing us all these failed examples, Dickens is making a powerful point. He's arguing that a good marriage, the ideal he hints at with Agnes, isn't about money or status. It's about a true partnership based on friendship and respect. So, another exam tip for you. A great question would be to compare how Bronte and Dickens critique their society. The key is to connect the personal to the political. Talk about how Jane's personal fight for freedom exposes the problems with gender roles, and how David's personal journey to find his place in the world exposes the injustices of the class system. It's all about linking the character's story to the big social issues. Okay, for our final section, let's look at poetry. Now sure, some Victorian poetry was all about celebrating progress and the British Empire, but there's this other really powerful thread of poetry that is full of, well, sadness. A kind of deep melancholy and spiritual doubt that was really haunting the Victorian age. And the poster child for this crisis of faith is Matthew Arnold. You have to remember what was happening. New scientific discoveries, especially Darwin's theory of evolution, were starting to poke holes in the traditional religious stories. For a lot of people, it felt like the very grounds they were standing on was starting to crumble. And Arnold captures this feeling perfectly in his poem Dover Beach with this incredible metaphor. He compares religious faith to a sea that was once full but is now pulling back, receding. And what's left behind isn't quiet peace, it's this melancholy, long withdrawing roar. It's such a powerful image, the sound of something massive and comforting just disappearing. So is Dover Beach a poem about despair, or is it actually a love poem? That's a great question to think about. Because right in the middle of all this bleakness, the speaker turns to his partner and basically says, the world is a mess, so let's just be true to each other. Arnold seems to be suggesting that maybe, just maybe, in a world without God, the only thing we can really count on is each other. Now, we can't talk about Victorian poetry without mentioning Emily Bronte. We know her for her incredible novel, of course, but she was also a poet of just staggering power. And her poetry doesn't just talk about the crisis of faith, it feels like she's living it. It's this raw, intense, internal battle between faith and total despair. And what's so amazing about her is that she could hold both feelings at once. I mean, look at this. In one poem, No Coward Soul Is Mine, she expresses this incredibly strong, defiant faith that feels unbreakable. But then in another poem, she can write about a kind of hope that is broken and isolating. That ability to capture both of those extremes is what makes her so brilliant, and it perfectly reflects the conflicted heart of the Victorian era. Okay, so for an exam on this, here's your angle. You want to compare how Arnold and Bronte show this crisis of faith. Arnold uses this big external metaphor, the sea pulling back from the land. Bronte, on the other hand, takes you inside the mind. It's an internal psychological battle. They're both wrestling with the same problem, but they're coming at it from completely different directions. All right, we've covered a lot of ground: monologues, novels, poetry. So let's take a step back and pull it all together. What are the big ideas you absolutely need to remember? So, we've seen how the dramatic monologue was perfect for getting inside someone's head. The novel was this giant canvas for critiquing society, and the poetry captured all the anxiety about losing faith. The big takeaway here is that these writers weren't just picking a format out of a hat. They were choosing the perfect tool for the job, the best way to explore the huge questions of their time. And that leads us to a great final exam question you might see. It's the kind of question that ties everything together. It's not just asking what Victorians wrote about, but how. The form they chose, the monologue, the novel, the poem, was absolutely essential to what they were trying to say about people in the world they lived in. So that's it for part 2. But we're not done yet. Next time, in our final installment, we're going to look at what happens as the Victorian era starts to wind down. We'll get into the gritty realism of authors like Thomas Hardy, we'll check out the whole art for art's sake movement, and we'll see how the stage was set for the 20th century. Hope to see you there. All right, welcome to the final and honestly the most crucial part of our Victorian literature series. We've laid all the groundwork, now it's all about one thing: the strategies you need to absolutely ace your exam and lock in those top marks. You know, this line from Tennyson's Ulysses, it just perfectly captures the mindset we need for this last big push. It's all about determination, right? So let's channel that exact spirit into our preparation today. So here's our game plan. We're going to kick things off with a big picture strategy, and then we'll dive deep into the specific techniques that make the real difference, the difference between a good answer and a truly great one. Let's get you exam ready. Okay, let's jump right in. In parts 1 and 2, we really got into the weeds on the core texts. All of that knowledge, that's our foundation. Today, we're going to build on top of that to construct some really powerful exam-winning answers. Just a quick refresh, our entire analysis really hinges on a solid grasp of these key Victorian figures. Everything we're going to talk about today connects right back to their work. Right, this is where the big marks are. Let's break down exactly how you should approach those long-form questions, the ones that can really make or break your final grade. We'll start with a classic example on Tennyson. Okay, so you see a question like this. Your first instinct might be to just start writing down facts. Don't. The very first thing you need to do is pause and create a strong, clear thesis. What's the central argument you're trying to prove here? And this is absolutely crucial. You could have the most brilliant idea, but if it's lost in a chaotic, messy answer, it's worthless in an exam. A clear, logical structure isn't just a nice to have, it's essential. It's how you signal to the examiner that you're in total command of your argument. Let's break this down.
Think of this 5-step plan as your blueprint for the perfect answer. Your intro is the roadmap. Each body paragraph tackles one key point from that map. And the conclusion? It just brings it all home, hammering in your main point one last time. It's clean, it's effective, and honestly, it makes it super easy for the examiner to give you the marks you deserve. So let's imagine body paragraph 1. You'd argue that Ulysses is the symbol of the universal human quest for meaning. You state your point, you back it up with the perfect quote, "I am a part of all that I have met," and then here's the key part. You connect it back to the question's demand for contemporary relevance. You link it to our modern search for self-discovery. It's that simple. Point, evidence, analysis. Every single time.
See how that works? It's a formula. Now let's try it on another classic high-stakes question, this time about Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. The principle is exactly the same. Just look at this thesis. It doesn't just say Jane Eyre is revolutionary. No, it says how it's revolutionary, giving you 3 clear pillars for your body paragraphs. An opening like this immediately tells the examiner, okay, this person knows what they're talking about. They have a plan. So your first body paragraph just flows right from that thesis. You have to highlight how Jane completely rejects the box that Victorian women were put in. You talk about her demands for independence and respect, which was absolutely wild for the time. And for your next point, again, straight from the thesis, you tackle the critique of the class system. The focus here is on how Jane, even though she's an orphan and a governess, somebody with very low status, insists on her own value as a person. That was a truly revolutionary idea back then. Okay, now we're gonna level up. If you really want to get into those top mark brackets, you can't just analyze books in a vacuum. You've got to create connections, comparing how different authors handle similar themes. This right here is what separates the top students from the rest. Making these kinds of connections shows that you understand the entire Victorian period as this big conversation between authors, not just a random collection of books. It shows synthesis, and trust me, that's a high-level skill that examiners are actively looking for. Now, what's really cool about this slide is how it maps out the different takes on the fallen woman trope. You've got Hawthorne and Eliot focusing on condemnation and repentance, but then there's Dickens. He offers this uniquely compassionate view of Emily, and he uses her story to critique society's huge double standards. This table is an absolute goldmine for quick revision. And Dickens comes back to this theme of disastrous marriages over and over. When you can drop specific examples into your essay, like Clara and Murdstone or David and Dora, you're showing off an impressive command of the text that's going to make any argument you make so much stronger. Excellent. Okay, let's switch gears to poetry. To really excel here, you have to analyze how poets create meaning with form and structure, not just what they're saying. We're going to focus on a key Victorian form, the dramatic monologue. And this table just brilliantly lays out the different ways Browning and Tennyson use the exact same poetic form to get totally different effects. Browning uses it to reveal the dark, twisted psychology of a speaker like the Duke, while Tennyson uses it to create this inspirational, public speech from a hero like Ulysses. Analyzing that difference is going to elevate your poetry answers for sure. What a line. I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. The chilling way he just understates it, that's what makes it so powerful. In just 9 words, Browning tells you more about the Duke's monstrous cruelty than a whole chapter of description ever could. That's the genius of the dramatic monologue right there. So, in your analysis, you have to link that specific quote directly to this definition. The commands he gave, well, they were a direct result of his pathological need for absolute control over his wife, who he saw as just another object in his collection. All right, let's switch to a rapid-fire round. We're going to consolidate some key topics for short notes into some really easy-to-revise tables. Think of this as your final revision toolkit. First up, Matthew Arnold. This table just perfectly captures his role as a critic of Victorian modernity. Remember the central metaphor for each poem, the Sea of Faith pulling back in Dover Beach and the isolated islands into Marguerite. Both of them point to his core themes of disillusionment and loneliness. Next, Thomas Hardy. The absolute key to analyzing nature in his work is to always remember its dual role. It's both a comforting friend, offering peace, and a brutal, unforgiving enemy, like that storm that just wipes out Gabriel Oak's livelihood. This conflict is totally central to Hardy's entire worldview. This is a classic exam trap, so listen up. Do not confuse the Bronte sisters. They were this family of literary geniuses, but each sister had her own unique, distinct, and powerful voice. And this table is your key. Charlotte gave us the proto-feminist icon in Jane Eyre, Emily gave us the dark, gothic passion of Wuthering Heights, and Anne, the quiet rebel, gave us the bold social realism of The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, tackling tough issues like domestic abuse head-on. You've got to know the difference. Okay, we've gone over the strategies, the key themes, the revision points. Now let's just bring it all together and get you ready for exam day. Keep this final checklist in your head as you prepare. A strong thesis, a logical structure, and specific evidence. Those are your keys to success. Don't just retell the story. Analyze the technique. And always, always keep one eye on the clock. So across these 3 sessions, we've built your complete toolkit for this exam. You have the knowledge, and now you have the winning strategy. Walk into that exam hall with your head held high. You're not just hoping to do well. You are prepared to do well. You are confident. You've put in the work and you are ready. Now go and succeed. Best of luck.